Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell, and you know what time it is. It is time for Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to, well, turn all of this uncertainty into your competitive advantage. I've got a really special guest here today. I got to tell you, I've been a little bit of a groupie for a while, maybe even close to stalking Andrew, and I was lucky enough to get him on the podcast. So Andrew, I got the courage to call you after listening to you on Victor Antonio's podcast. And Victor, I consider a really, really good friend. And I was just so impressed by the podcast you did on there that I thought I'm just going to reach out and see if I can get you on as a guest. So welcome to Thrive.
Well, back at you. I'm a great admirer of yours, and I'm thrilled to be in your podcast. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to kick off, dive in. Everybody stay with us because we have a really dynamic show for you today. We're going to discuss really where this sales profession is going and what truly gets Andrew psyched up and excited about the profession and what you need to know to be more successful in today's marketplace. Again, welcome back to Thrive. And again, we've got a great guest today, Andrew Sykes. I mean, Andrew, gosh, when you look at your website, you just have your fingers in everything. I mean, you're the CEO in Habits at Work, you're a professor, but your real passion is putting trust back into the sales process. And I'm most curious about that. When did this passion hit you? Because again, when I heard you on Victor Antonio's podcast, I don't know that I've ever heard anybody speak with so much passion around trust. So where did it come from? Why did it start? And why do you have so much passion around this particular skill set or characteristic?
I have to confess to a passion for really, really difficult problems.
Okay.
And I think that salespeople have, over generations, earned the right to be called the least trustworthy profession on the planet. And I think that that is both tragic and really, really sad for a profession that includes a lot of people who are committed to helping other people make progress in their lives. And I hope that one day parents will say to their kids, I hope you become a salesperson. And they mean that because salespeople are known to be extraordinary in the domain of trust and exemplary in the opportunity for service. And I think we're the exact opposite of that today. So I'm passionate about it because it's a hard problem. I think it's worth solving. And if you believe, like I believe, that salespeople are the access for most of us to get what we want in life, then surely we all deserve having salespeople we can trust instead of salespeople we fear and avoid.
Where and why do you think it derailed? Or has it simply always been that way? I mean, gosh, when I think back to watching movies and things like that, I mean, they talk about, the snake oil salesman and things like that. So it certainly has been tainted for a long time.
Yes, I think it is a long-standing problem, but I do think it's got worse in the last couple of decades. And I would say it was always a problem, not because salespeople are untrustworthy, but because I think it is a natural human tendency to withdraw trust from people when we don't know who they are or what they want, or worse, when we're sure or we suspect that they have self-interest as a motive. And I think the fact that salespeople are paid commission, salespeople are often known to be people who are trying to close a deal rather than help you, they get labeled as someone who does this for their own gain. But the truth is, I don't think that it's salespeople who are uniquely affected by this. I think leaders who are trying to inspire their team are often suspected of an agenda, or, personal coaches or exercise coaches, anyone who's trying to help another human being, where that person in return says, who are you and what do you want? And then answers that question as we do as judgy people, because I think we are, as human beings, quick to judge. If we answer those questions, who are you and what do you want, with an answer like, you're a salesperson or a leader or a consultant or an advisor, and what you want is something for you rather than me, we withdraw trust. It's just that salespeople have been in that position for so long that I think our reputation precedes us.
Yeah.
If I answer the question, well, why did it get so much worse in the last couple of decades? My answer to that is I believe that our efforts to put technology between us and our customers has eroded rather than built trust.
Yeah, I think this is really a fascinating subject because one, it's the moment that something becomes scarce in a society, it increases in value. And we are certainly living in a time when trust is scarce. I mean, I don't know that ever in my lifetime we have trusted less with a lot of times very good reason to trust less, but when the pillars of your society, such as corporate entities, your governments, become untrustworthy, it just sort of cascades down kind of on everybody. But I've been in sales a long time, and I was one of those people that I did not want to go into sales. I thought sales was a dirty word and an untrustworthy profession. And then some life circumstances put me in a position where I had to be a breadwinner in my family, and I was female living in a man's world where I needed to earn a lot of money, and I needed to earn a lot of money with a flexible schedule. Sales was that window and that opportunity. And I'm so glad I found it because it changed my life. But I've got to admit, Andrew, that when I got into sales, one of the problems was I felt like all the sales training I went to was sort of me focused. I mean, it was rarely I came up at a time in the 80s and 90s when we were talking about relationship selling, but it really wasn't relationship selling. It was like, how could I be nice to somebody so I could get them to buy something so I could close my own sale? So I'm curious what you think about sales training and the terminologies of the art of the close, and getting to the decision maker, and just the way that sales has been trained over years.
Yeah. My colleague, Craig Wortman, who founded the Kellogg Sales Institute that I'm lucky enough to be a part of, has this wonderful saying, which is that closing a deal is the natural outcome of a sales process run well. By
Mm,
which he means it's
yeah.
not a set of tactics or tricks or manipulations or having a closed strategy. It is simply committing to helping another human being make progress in their lives and having an intentional way of understanding where they are and where they want to end up and how they're thinking about getting there and being a great partner in that progress. And if you do that, it's a little bit like asking someone to marry you. You shouldn't do that unless you're very, very sure you get a yes. The same,
Right.
I think, is true in sales. If you're trying to force a close or force a yes, I, like you, probably went to a lot of sales training in my life where I learned neuro-linguistic programming and get your
Yeah.
customer to say yes a lot and not along, so that when you ask for the deal, they'll just be in the habit of saying yes. And I've thrown all of that away because what I think it does is leave people feeling sold to. And
Yeah.
it's not a fun feeling. And I want to be the kind of salesperson that other people look forward to working with next time, not just bought from me because they got talked into it or bullied into it or some other method of getting them to do what they didn't want to do on a time frame they didn't like at a price they couldn't afford.
Well, what I think is interesting about that is that, again, I've been at this for a long time. So the negative ramifications of selling to somebody you shouldn't have sold to were not as high as they are now. When I was coming along, we as sellers controlled the buying cycle. I mean, literally, I started out in the banking profession. If you didn't put your money in our bank, there were two other banks in the community where you put your money. And that was it. There was no going online. I couldn't do it globally. I didn't have internet banks or anything. But in today's world, where the consumer truly controls the buying cycle, I mean, if I sell to you and it's a bad experience, that's bigger than a relationship between you and me, because you're going to tell 30 people, and people are going to verify with you before they would buy from me. So would you agree that it's a different stake at this point?
I would, and I would also have salespeople reflect on the fact that You may move companies today,
Hmm.
but you're likely to stay in a similar industry and be going back to the same people you sold to for company XYZ when you moved to company ABC. And if you broke their trust the first time around, don't expect them to treat you differently just because you've got a new product to sell or you with a new logo. So I think it also follows you through your life now much more because of social media and our reputations preceding us. In the old days, we could pick up the phone and it was the first time someone knew who we were. Today, they know who we are by looking
Yeah.
online, looking at our social media profiles, or speaking to other people, as you say, who've had a good or a bad experience about or with working with us.
Yeah. What I'm curious that when you're teaching sales and literally, are you working with people who sales is a part of what they were going to do, or they literally are committing to going into the sales profession?
Yes.
Yes.
All of the above, salespeople, people coming into the profession, and also with leaders who don't like when I say this, but I believe it to my core, that to lead is to sell. It is
I agree.
exactly the same set of skills. The difference is leaders have employees and team members, salespeople have customers, but we're both in the business of guiding people to make progress in their lives for a common good.
Yeah, I could not agree with that you more. I mean, years ago when I taught sales, I taught sales to women who did not want to be in the sales profession, and the very first thing that I would say to them is, "You sell every day of your life," and they would be like, "No, we don't." And I'm like, "Have you ever gotten your child to eat a vegetable? You sold that. Have you ever tried to get your spouse or significant other to eat healthier, or or try to get an aging parent not to drive?" I mean, especially I feel like women, because we're so often kind of managing the family, all we do is are selling because we're trying to get everybody to do what is best for them. So
Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. But I think it's so interesting we don't keep that dynamic. I mean, I always say to people, Andrew, if I showed up in Chicago tomorrow and said, "Could you tell me a good place to eat?" You would jump with 20 ideas and you wouldn't be vested in whether I went to one. You would just want me to have a good experience. Why don't we bring that mindset into sales where you just care that people have the information they need, but you don't get so attached to the close that it feels uncomfortable.
yeah. And if I'm honest, I think that a lot of the blame lies with sales managers and sales leaders who are putting a lot of pressure on salespeople to close by the end of the quarter, to meet quota, which is a totally
Yeah.
artificially manufactured goal, versus training a workforce of salespeople who have one job: go out there and help your customers make smart decisions that lead to progress in their business, their life, their career. And if you do that, chances are they're going to invite you to use your product along that journey. But if you lead with product, I think that that's show up and throw up approach that many sales training methodologies endorse breaks trust, because you haven't earned the right to talk about your product until you've given someone else the opportunity to get off their chest how they think they should solve their
Yeah.
problem. And it's an arrogant view to assume that customers don't have a very well formed view of how to solve their problem. You're not arriving on a white horse with the solutions that they've just been waiting years and months for you to arrive. No, they got options, and they may have good reasons why they haven't solved their problem yet, but it's not because you just haven't shown up so far.
Yeah. When it comes to sales today and it comes to trust, I mean, there's so much talk about AI and and the role of that in the sales process and the authentic role of that in the sales process. How are you starting to talk about when it comes to trust and it comes to sales and the everything that's going on with technology, and how are you starting to bake those things in, and should salespeople be embracing it? I mean, what kind of what's on the landscape there?
Yeah. I'm of the view that these tools, like tools before them, can be tremendously useful in helping us be productive and efficient, but not necessarily effective.
Okay.
And what the distinction here is, it's common for all of us to say we don't know what to trust anymore between deep fakes and chat GPT. and this amazing technology, what's real and what's not. And customers are feeling the same thing. So I think their senses are up, sniffing for what might be fake or generated. And in that world, I think that salespeople who show up as themselves, who are very clear and make it clear to their customers that you're dealing with me, a real human being. And yes, I use tools, but you can count on me to never interact with you through one of those tools or to use them instead of me. We'll have a competitive advantage going forward.
How do salespeople keep trust when maybe some things that their companies are doing are eroding trust? And I'll just give you a really a simple example. I mean, I came up through the financial services world, and as the company that I worked for got bigger and bigger, we would do things like, they would put us out in the community and tell us to make a lot of lot loans, talk and develop relationships with realtors and with builders. And then all of a sudden, the economy would start to pull back a little bit, and they would say, absolutely no more lot loans, no more real estate loans, cut those relationships, cut those ties, don't do that. And then 6 months later, when the economy would turn back around, or a year later, they would want us to go back into the community and build those bridges again. And I think a lot of salespeople get caught in those traps because executive leadership is managing to a budget or to a profit and loss, and salespeople are having to live in their communities doing business, whether it's good or bad, with their customers. How do you kind of tell people to navigate those challenges?
Yeah, this is such a tricky one. And I have a strong point of view on this, which maybe salespeople won't want to hear. And this is it, that psychologically, the only strategy for dealing with breaks in trust from your company is to own them as the salesperson wholly and completely. In other words, to take the blame on yourself, because there's nothing in my view that erodes trust more than saying, well, my manager did this, or the CEO did that, and I'm just the bearer of bad news, but it wasn't my fault. That just infuriates customers. And if that's true, then it begs the question, are you as a salesperson prepared to own the behavior of your organization?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is yes, stay there and do that. If the answer is no, find a company whose actions you can own. And I really mean owning it. When we break trust, our default is to say, I'm so sorry, provide an excuse, and then wait for someone to say, oh, it's okay. And it never is.
Yeah, that's true.
I recommend to people to never lead with an apology, because if you lead with an apology, you're apologizing for how you feel instead of the impact that you had. And there's no credibility in it because you haven't even taken the time to ask, Meredith, what was the impact of my break in trust and how might I remedy it? So how can I believe that you're sorry if you haven't first taken some time and effort to try and fix what you did?
Mm-hmm. What is, what is the impact of building trust in today's marketplace as a salesperson? I mean, what would, I guess, be the impact, the benefit, and what are steps that salespeople can take to do it? Because I do think that it's harder. I think we become a very cynical society, and I'm not sure that isn't valid to be cynical. It's not good, but I'm not sure it's not valid. So what would be the impact? What is it that you tell a salesperson that says this is truly a characteristic or a skill that you need to develop? How do you convince them it's important? The second is, what are the steps you tell them to take?
Okay. Well, the first thing I distinguish for them is if your customers are going to buy from your company, whether or not you're there and whether or not you're good, then you're not actually in sales. You're an order taker, in which case, close your mouth, take the order, and be thankful for that job.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few companies whose products are so good that for now, they have few competitors and people will beat a path to their door. And some technology companies were that and suddenly are no longer the only game in town. Most of us sell for companies whose products, if we're honest, are not much better or worse than competitors, not much cheaper or more expensive than everyone else's. And so there is really a job to convince someone to buy from us versus everyone else. And if that's the case, what I say to salespeople is customers decide that they want to buy from you before they decide if or what they want to buy from your company. So job number one is to have them buy into you. And if that's true, then the next logical step is to ask, well, how do I have people buy me? And what does that mean? And what it means is they trust you to tell the truth about your products and service and competitors. But if you show up as a salesperson, no one thinks that you're going to tell the truth. And so I try and explode the myth that I think gets a lot of salespeople into trouble, which is this belief, and we all have believed it, that trust takes time to build. And I think it is an honest mistake because we've all spent months, if not years, trying to build trust with prospects. So it certainly feels like trust takes time to build. But I think what we're missing is what we're really doing 9 times out of 10 is trying to claw our way out of a trust hole into which we stepped or were put because we failed the very first task that we have as salespeople, which is to answer the question, who are you and what do you want? Before people make up their minds for themselves as you're a salesperson. So what you want is to sell me something I don't need for your personal gain. And so what I encourage salespeople to do is to ruthlessly design their first impression, including how they introduce themselves, so they can share with authenticity that I am a salesperson, but I'm committed to something higher than my commission. I'm in this business because I care to serve someone else, in this case, you, my customer, over my own needs. And if you can't make that claim authentically, then you get what you deserve, which is a customer who will put you in a trust hole. And if you're lucky, wait months and watch and see how you may or may not climb out of that hole through your behavior. It leads to another conversation, which is this distinction between integrity and trustworthiness. You know, a lot of people who hear me say that say, well, I am trustworthy because I tell the truth and I have good intentions and I keep my promises. To which I say, congratulations, that makes you someone of extraordinary integrity. And while that's important for keeping and maintaining trust, it doesn't get you trust in the first place. Trustworthiness is an assessment other people make of you on, frankly, very little data that isn't a good signal of whether or not you're trustworthy. Like, do you smile? Do you make eye contact, at least in Western cultures? Do you take the time and risk to ask them about themselves, or do you get straight down to business? Do you introduce yourself as a salesperson and let them think you're in it for the money? Or do you share your origin story of why you're doing what you do for some reason other than money? So there's a lot that goes on in those milliseconds to minutes when trust is given. And it's the moments, not the grand gestures, that are the opportunities for trust to be received and won or lost, as it turns out.
Yeah, you know, I think so often today we walk into situations and we're a bit of a victim of the experience the person has had before,
Totally.
and you know, and so we're almost starting from a hole.
Yeah.
And I find that the most powerful in most powerful step to take to build trust is listening. I mean, we just do not, as a society, listen anymore. And especially when the economy becomes uncertain and people are frustrated or they're scared or they're overwhelmed. Everybody's so desperately trying to be heard that if you will just stop and listen, I always tell salespeople, if you'll listen on the front end, you'll get the chance to be aggressive on the back end. Because once that trust piece is built, people are expecting you. Like if, you know, you and I had a long-term relationship and I've listened to you, then when I turn around, pick up the phone and call Andrew and say, Andrew, I need you to buy this. I want you to do it by tomorrow. You're like, you can't do it fast enough because I built that piece on the front end.
Couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
I often do an exercise with people to ask them to think of a great listener. And that turns out not to be an easy exercise for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
But once they've got a name, I ask them, tell me just one word that signifies how you feel about this person. And I typically hear words like respect, love, admiration, friendship. I've asked tens of thousands of people this question, and I've never heard someone say, Mary is a great listener, and I cannot stand her.
Right.
It's always listening equals affinity. And the other thing, I read recently that grandmaster chess players burn something like 500 calories in a chess game. But if you watch them, they're not moving. And we think calorie burning is a
Yeah.
physical thing. It's what's going on in your brain that consumes a lot of calories. And I think the same is true of listening. Because I've come to the realization that listening is paying attention, not hearing. And that
Yes.
little phrase, paying attention, means it's a costly thing. And that's why I think we don't listen well, because it is actually very costly to ruthlessly pay attention to someone, to quieten that voice in your head, and to have your being be fully with someone else so that they feel like they're seen and heard and understood and appreciated for their humanity, not just the opportunity they are for you.
I think you might be onto something though. If that you convince people they would lose weight by listening, I think you might just
Yes, I think that's a business venture we should start together. It
I think
never occurred to me we could do that.
I'm thinking, we might just be able to solve world peace, get people healthy, and make a lot of money.
The listening diet, it sounds like a winner.
That's right. What is hard to believe, but we are about at the end of this podcast. Andrew, I always end with two very important questions. You can answer them in either direction. Either one is fine to go first. How do people find you? How do they find out more about your passion for trust, your work, with the, as CEO of Habits at Work? And then what is your greatest piece of advice for people out there right now who are dealing with definitely an uncertain marketplace? Where do they need to focus their time and energies in order to be successful going forward?
Wow, firstly, that's a generous question and a beautiful question. So the first one, there are many places people can find me. andrewsykes.com is my professional speaking website. habitsatwork.com is my business website. And I love connecting with people on LinkedIn, so they can find me on LinkedIn, Andrew Sykes, and type in Habits at Work, and you'll distinguish me from the many other Andrew Sykeses in the world. So I look forward to connecting to people there, and thank you for asking me. To the second question, when I ask people about how much they trust friends and family, they typically say a 9, and coworkers, they typically say a 7. And then I ask them this question, how much do you trust yourself?
Mm.
First instinct is a 9.5. And then I have them think back on their life and all the promises they've made to themselves, the big ones, and maybe yesterday's promises to go to the gym. And with that reflection, many people realize they don't trust themselves to keep promises to themselves, because we're often giving up on ourselves to meet promises to everyone else in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's one piece of advice I could give, it would be to treat the promises to yourself like you've made them to your customers or your spouse or your kids, to be as trustworthy to yourself as we are to other people.
I love that, because I do think that, the older I get, the more that I learn that truly the way you treat yourself is how you turn around and you treat other people, that it really does need to begin there. Well, Andrew, it has been amazing having you. I hope that you will come back, because we have scratched the surface of so many other things that I want to ask, and I want to learn about the work that you are doing and the mission that you are on. And I am glad that we finally connected in person. So again, thank you so much for joining us at Thrive, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Remember, Every week, we come to you with another episode, another guest, and another set of strategies of ways you can turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage.